Hello, hello. Thank you all for tuning in again. Welcome to Futureview on AI and Data podcast. I'm Ovi, your host, and each episode brings expert stories, ideas, and practical steps for citizens, leaders, NGOs, whoever, and our global partner, what's happening in the field of AI. Our special guest today is Dr. Abiodun Egbetokun. Um, I'll let him introduce himself briefly. So, Doctor, please tell us a bit of a background and possibly what you do with AI at the present time.
Yeah, thank you very much, the dear host, and thank you for having me. Yeah, I have quite an interesting background. So interesting that some people tend to call me crazy, because my bachelor's is in mechanical engineering, and then I went ahead to do a master's in technology management. And on the back of that, I did a PhD in economics. So you can imagine, now you will understand why some people just think, yeah, this guy doesn't know what he wants out of life and so on and so forth. But it's quite an interesting thing. We're not talking about the story of why I made those choices today. Let me just talk about myself and leave it there. So so since I finished, even before I went for my PhD, I started working at the National Center for Technology Management in Nigeria, which is a policy research institute. And that's where I got, baptized into the field of policy analysis and the broader discipline of technology management. At NACETEM, I was deputy director of research at some point, and then the head of the Science Policy and Innovation Studies. My research is mostly focused on why, the microeconomic sources of innovation and entrepreneurship. So why do people become entrepreneurs? Where do new technologies come from? Why do some companies perform better, particularly in relation to innovation, than others? And I also ask these questions at the national level as well. Currently, I'm senior lecturer at the Montfort University in the UK and the faculty head of research students training. I'm responsible for developing the training program for PhD students, so helping to build the next generation of scholars, if you like. I've done extensive consultancy work in the area of policy and technology for organizations like UNIDO, the African Union Commission, GIZ in Germany, and so on. My research, as I mentioned, one of the core areas of my work is in technology management. So how can we manage technology to drive development? And to the extent to which AI is a class of technology, I'm interested in that. So lately, I've been doing deep, detailed research on the implications of generative AI in the context of higher education, and the implications of generative AI for informal small businesses across developing countries, particularly in Africa. I have a book that came out in 2024, written with two of my very brilliant colleagues, and we have another one coming out soon. So that's a brief about me.
That's brief, but quite insightful. And you speak a lot of my language. I'm trying to I have a small training program, trying to get people in the university in their final year to look at their final year project as a startup. Is there a way to turn it into a startup? So when you finish school, you don't just dump your final project and that's it and go away. How do we, change that to become a project that you look into and develop something from it with the help of AI anyway. So it's quite interesting what we do. Nice to meet you. Let's go into it. Today our team is on AI policy and strategy. And my first question is research has shown that only 30% of Africans were online in 2023. That's against 67% worldwide. What do you think are the main, maybe 2 or 3 policy moves? Any idea could go ahead and double those home internet use in maybe in the next 5 years or thereabout?
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very important question. But before I share my thoughts in relation to what I think are the game-changing policy moves that, that could help drive up internet penetration or the online presence of Africans. I think we should put that figure in context, the data that you just quoted. So roughly half of Africans were online, were connected to the internet in 2023, relative to compared to the share of the rest of the world. So 37% of Africans versus 67% worldwide. Now, what we need to bear in mind is that that figure masks a lot of structural and demographic differences, across the world. If you think about per capita electricity access, if you think about per capita access to, or even if you think about purchasing power parity, so the ability to afford internet connectivity or broadband internet. So you compare a country like the United States with any country in Africa, the difference is going to be clear. So this kind of distinction, I think, is important. The gap is definitely going to be huge because we have huge infrastructural deficiency in Africa compared to the rest of the world. That does not mean that we should not aim to close that gap. But I just thought it's useful to put these figures in context once in a while. So the point I'm trying to make is that maybe Africa is not doing too badly for where we are because of the other factors that need to be in place for internet penetration to really, really be widespread. Until we fix those factors, then I don't think we are ready to move as fast as we would like. So what are the for me, two things are always on top, should be on top of the agenda, and they're always on top of my thoughts when you think about how to fast track, home internet use, for example. So let's say we want to see these figures double in 5 years. What should we do? I think the first thing, and this is very fundamental, is infrastructure sharing. Now, right now, across most African countries, providers do not share infrastructure. Now, let me give you an example that I'm sure that most of your listeners and the followers would relate with. Take Nigeria, for example. So if I bank with one bank and I want to use my ATM card on the ATM machine of another bank, I've got to pay some carriage fee. Now, what that means is that these banks they do not share infrastructure seamlessly, no matter how we look at it. I mean, in the UK, if I take my ATM card, my debit card, I could go to pretty much any ATM anywhere in the country and withdraw money, except for, ATMs, entrepreneurial ATMs, I like to call them, ATMs that are located, installed in remote areas where people normally would not have access, So they tend to charge something, but the norm, the standard is that you don't get charged for that. If I make a call to anyone on the same mobile network as myself, I pay zero, as in literally zero. Now, if you are an MTN user in Nigeria, you cannot call an MTN user in Nigeria for free, let alone an MTN user in South Africa, which is the home of MTN. So the same is true for the internet, unless we evolve a system that incentivizes the sharing of infrastructure such that, carriage fees are eliminated, open access infrastructure sharing across telecom communicators become the norm. I think it will just be all talk, So it shouldn't be that an ISP is offering internet access and anyone who is not their customer would have to pay some additional carriage charge because they are with a different customer. That needs to go, and there needs to be deliberate policy intervention that helps to incentivize this infrastructure sharing. And then the second thing, I think, is the problem of the last mile. Now, I can talk about this till tomorrow because I'm fond of the last mile, because I think it is a game changer. Now, the last mile is how you deliver the goods or the services to the end user. This is usually the most problematic along the supply chain. So think about Amazon, which is, one of the biggest e-commerce platforms in the world. they need delivery truck drivers, even though they have robotized warehouses where they don't particularly need people that much, So robots can sort your orders and move it from one shelf to another. But they still need people to get in the trucks and deliver the goods to your doorstep. These are the people that cover the last mile. So regarding internet use and broadband access, universal access cannot happen unless we figure out the last mile problem. So most people now have a smartphone, especially in the younger generation in Africa, which is most of the population, by the way, given the demography. But are they able to afford the getting on the internet? This is part of the last mile problem. I spoke about purchasing power parity the other time. So policies that fix this kind of ancillary problems will help to overcome the last mile problem. And I think some definite policy action needs to be taking place in that space.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. That's very insightful. Yeah, a lot to unpack there. We haven't got the time here, but thank you so much, Doc. That leads to my next question, to say that Africa holds under 1% of global data center. When you talk of AI, it's about data. Actually, all emerging technologies reliant on data. It's about data. Well, we don't have that data center enough. And there's this talk that data, biased data, and all that, because all the models are trained with the West, the data from the other continents and all that. What would you say would be the simple rules, that could speed up private builds and yet keep energy bills low in that sense?
That's a very big question. It's like the elephant in the room. I'm labeling the elephant in the room because as much as we want enhanced capacity for data centers, there is also the problem that the environmental footprint, the carbon footprint of these data centers is extremely huge. I mean, I read a study recently that, well, I don't know if the numbers are exaggerated, but, plus or minus, it's like, it's a case of if there's no problem, people will not cook up the problem anyway, particularly researchers. So there was this estimate that was given that for every single search on ChatGPT, for example, you use 7 times as much energy as if you were doing the search, performing the search on Google, And I remember in those days, because I was old enough when Google was launched, I remember in those days, people used to say that, Google is like, the wizard of the internet. It's using too much energy compared to Internet Explorer of that preceded it. So this problem, we are carrying it forward. And I think it's a real problem now. Data centers are getting bigger and bigger to power the AI revolution, but their carbon footprint is really very high. So we need to really, really figure out how to ensure that we enhance our data center capacity in Africa while keeping the environmental footprint, the carbon footprint low. Two things I think can be done, and both of them are related in a sense. So in policy, generally you have to combine the carrot and stick approach. You don't always use the carrot, you don't always use the stick. If you always use the carrot, then the state gets captured by capitalists. If you always use the stick, nobody wants to do anything. The private sector is not incentivized to make investment. So one of the first thing I think that should be done or could be done is to ensure for governments across the continent to ensure that land is available to build data centers. You see, no matter how much we think about AI and so on, things still need to be built on the ground. This is where data center capacity will happen. So if builders, private sector operators can get fast track access to land, permitted by government, C of O's and whatever needs to be done, the entire gamut. Especially for greenfield data centers, but this needs then to be tied to renewable energy sourcing. So if you're going to apply for a land permit under the fast track route, you then need to ensure that you're going to be using a significant share of renewable energy. So one way or another, that achieves some balance. Now, another way that I think that could be done is for existing data centers, an incentive could be created for them to enhance the renewable energy share of their total energy mix. You see what I mean? So the first, I was talking about greenfield investment, ensuring that they get fast-track access to land if they guarantee a good share of renewable energy. But for existing ones, then there could be an incentive that helps them to, upscale the share of renewable energy that they use. And then that could then give them access to some tax holidays or some additional incentives. Rwanda, for example, is experimenting with that under what they call their green data center policy. That's exactly what they are trying to do. So encouraging greenfield and existing data centers to increase the share of renewable energy in their energy consumption mix. And I think that's a very fascinating idea that would work.
Thank you so much. Very insightful, as always. I think this my next question is a bit related to the first one in terms of internet. It said that urban dwellers. You know, when you talk about AI or internet, or most people that doesn't know, they say a lot of things is happening in Africa already, but I believe it's just that 1% or very small people in the cities and the main towns knowing about these things and what. But this research says that 83% of urban dwellers worldwide use internet, but only 48% in rural areas. So even in that Africa that were struggling, still that localization of small portion of people using internet. And my question is, what local incentives could shrink that rural gap first, to help people, be able to get more internet, even when they're in the rural, apart from the overall issues we're having in Africa?
Yeah. Again, very interesting question. We can talk about these until tomorrow, but let me highlight two things. The first is that we need to think about what are the sources of the gaps to be able to fix it. I was speaking earlier, regarding the statistics, that we need to look at the structural characteristics of African economies before we can even get a sense of how to solve the problems. Now, on average, the rural dweller in Africa does not have electricity for most of their waking hours. And of course, their sleeping hours, So once we fix problems like that, other related problems become a lot easier to fix. Yeah. But having said that, it doesn't mean that we should just cross our fingers and say, okay, since there's no electricity, then we cannot be talking about internet access and so on and so forth. That's not true, and it's a misguided perception. I think what we need to begin to do is to bundle our policy solutions together and practical solutions. So we want to close the rural-urban gap in terms of internet access. We need to begin to think of solutions that bundle electricity access together with internet access. We try to offer internet to people who don't have electricity. Trust me, any day, anytime, they will pick electricity. It is as simple, But having said that, in this regard, I think increasing the share of people in rural areas that have access to the internet is one problem, in one area where cooperatives can work. It may sound esoteric when I say cooperatives can work, but I don't know how many of the people listening to us or watching us now will be familiar with a particular cooperative in South Africa called Zenzeleni. I'll encourage you to Google that. Zenzeleni is Zenzeleni. It's a very fascinating example of how these things could be done. It's community owned. In every sense of the word, it is a cooperative. Now, when you hear the word cooperative, you tend to think about, Ajo or Susu, as we would say in where I'm from, where people put money together in a pot and you rotate how you get access to the funds. Zenzemeni is a cooperative, community owned. In fact, it's more like a triple helix relationship with limited support from government. Most of the support is from the grassroots, and the University of Cape Town or Western Cape is involved in that, bringing knowledge. So what Zenzemeni does is to provide, is to act like a village level internet service provider. That's a very fascinating model that I think can be scaled up across the continent. So here we're thinking about microgrids that come together with village level ISPs. So this kind of model could be supported with microgrants. These are interventions for which just a few $1 million will make a very big difference. So imagine if we have, 1,000 Zenzemenis across African countries. The story will change almost overnight. So that's one model that I believe can work well. So we can incentivize that at the local level. And then the second solution that I would propose, is related to a point that I made earlier. It's about infrastructure sharing. So some digital services need to happen at zero rate. The market model that operates in many African countries today would not permit that, because most service providers still need to pay a huge premium for hosting their services across platforms that they do not own. So if we fix that problem of infrastructure sharing, then we can offer many key digital services at zero rate. Look at what has been done by M-Pesa in Kenya. Even though people need to pay a certain small amount, the entry barrier is very low, and the impact it has had on ensuring that people who ordinarily would be unbanked are now banked is very huge. So this is the kind of model that I think is helpful in enhancing internet access in the rural areas and closing the urban-rural gap in terms of internet access.
All right. Thank you so much. Once again, very insightful, very, very insightful. Thank you. So let's talk about ethics a bit. There's always big talks about ethics, ethical AI, ethical. And my question is, what do you think must, go on a checklist that any African AI project now, because everyone is starting, but when we focus on Africa, what do you think should be on a checklist to ensure ethical AI products that every project will tick off before they launch?
Yeah, I would say 4 things, and they are kind of self-explanatory. All right, they are the things that the issue with AI and why we talk a lot about its ethics is because of the manner in which it evolved. Nobody ever thought that a technology would take the world by storm the way AI has done. And it turns out, even though it's been around for a long time, when it came into public consciousness, it turns out that nobody really gave serious thought to the ethical implications before its massive adoption. Now, usually what happens with many technologies is that people think about what might be the ethical implications, you understand, before you then, experience massive adoption of the technology. In the case of AI, as with some technologies like nuclear power, for example, the reverse is the case. They became more, they came into public consciousness, massively adopted before we then started thinking about what are the ethical problems that might come with it. So I think in this sense, African countries, because we are latecomers in the space, we have an opportunity to learn a lot from the mistakes of the past. So every African AI project must do 4 things. Ensure data rights from the beginning. So every data set has to be based on consent. People must know that you are using their data, what you are using it for. And the data must be locally relevant and completely anonymized. So I shouldn't be able to go into any AI project and identify you. The other day I was making a joke with one of my students. This is kind of a mundane example, but it's something that could be worse with AI. This person got access to some government intervention many years ago to start a small business. And when I say many years ago, I mean more than 5 years ago. Could you believe it? I was searching on the internet and I found this person's name and the exact intervention that they got. This should not happen. And, this was on Google. So imagine when we have many strong and large AI projects that could, that could make data accessible on a very massive scale without privacy, without data rights, we're going to run into trouble. And then secondly is inclusion. The voices of the grassroots, of people who ordinarily will be excluded from the AI landscape needs to be included. And thirdly, it's good that we're now aware of the potential risks of AI, bias, misinformation, job displacement, potentially hallucinations, and so on and so forth. So every project I would strongly recommend must be preceded with solid, objective, and unbiased risk impact assessment. We need to do that. This is one thing that we don't do well in Africa, and I'm saying this based on my policy experience. We don't evaluate the impact of what we are doing. We don't think about how it could affect people and so on and so forth. This needs to change if we are serious about, having a strong footprint in the AI landscape. And finally is governance. And governance is something that requires public-private partnership. There's a role that government will play. There's a role that the private sector will play. There's a role that, funders will play in ensuring that there is accountability within the context of any project. There should never be, a project so large or a AI company so large that it will become too powerful for any state or any stakeholder or any regulator to call to order.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's look a little bit about gender gaps. That's a survey that was looked at by 160 African AI companies. This is new, recent anyway. So it's been there before, but just survey 160 companies and find that only 13% of it is led by women. What's your take on how future AI rules or anything at all that will help to close that leadership gap?
Very interesting. The straightforward answer to that is that we need to look at the source. As I said earlier, some of these problems we're talking about are best attacked from the source. Why we do things that help us, why we implement palliatives today, we need to be more strategic about the future. So what's going on at secondary school level? What level of interest do we have among the girl children, in getting into the technology space, let alone AI? What interventions are there for them to pick up the basic skills at, at the very fundamental level? This is when we will know for sure that, it's only a matter of time before this gap disappears. But as palliatives, I think as a starting point, we need to be more serious about collecting disaggregated data. I mean, the data you led this question with is already a very good one. So the share of women who are accessing funding for AI, or the share of women who are leading AI companies, then we know that we have an issue. The next thing is, why do we have this issue? I think we need to do more systems mapping, more needs analysis, more gap analysis, so that we understand what are the driving factors and what are the potential change levers that we could tweak here and there. I just mentioned one of them, things to happen at the grassroots. I mean, for example, I know a group, the Odua group. They are doing a very fantastic work in southwestern Nigeria, for example. They are going into schools and establishing coding schools for secondary school kids. And for some of these kids, when you listen to their testimony, you'll be amazed at how much of a difference it has made in their outlook to the future. So I won't be surprised 10, 15 years down the line, we have the next captain of the AI industry, who is an alumna of this kind of program. And I think we need many more of these kind of programs. And, the final point I will mention in relation to that is the need to build pathways from academia to entrepreneurship. Right now, it's extremely difficult, no matter how bright you are or how good an idea you are. It's already very difficult to be a woman in the average African society. If you add on top of that an academic and you're entrepreneurial and you create something, it's really, really difficult to go from the university to the market. That gap, admittedly, is shrinking, but I think it needs to shrink much faster.
Thank you. I think that's very insightful. And I mean, we're almost rounding up. But to conclude, what do you think is they said billions, not millions, can be added to Africa's GDP by 2030 by AI. So what do you think? How do we track? I can hear you talk about tracking. How do we track? What economic indicators can we track to see if this is real, in the real sense of it?
Right. But I mean, I am so much passionate about impact evaluation. So when things are working, we need to be able to measure them, to know exactly that it's working. So we need to track the right indicators. One of the right indicators, in my opinion, is job creation. So is AI or are AI companies creating jobs? Then secondly, we need to measure the content of the jobs being created. Are we simply starting new companies and hiring more gatekeepers and cleaners and so on? Or we're actually hiring people with high skills content in their job? And we need to disaggregate these across sectors: health, agriculture, logistics, education, and so on and so forth. And then measuring revenue and export data in relation to local AI firms is very important. Many people may not know this. You can as well export technology. Many of us in Africa, for instance, use Android phones. An Android phone embodies an imported technology, which is the Android operating system. So for every phone on which the operating system is loaded, the owners of that software get some money. So that's some kind of export revenue that is coming. I'm sure that if we track the figures correctly, we can quickly see how many embedded content is being generated on the continent in relation to AI that is being used elsewhere, that can give us a sense of how well we are doing in terms of contribution to the economy. Right now, I don't see that being measured anywhere on the continent. And finally, I think there's a lot more that I can say, but because we're out of time now, but finally, let me just mention, public sector adoption of AI. What do government offices do with AI? What do central governments do with AI? What do local governments do with AI? All of these things are very, very important levers of change that we need to measure. We don't want to continue to go into offices in this day and age and everything is analog. Nigeria, for instance, has 774 local governments. How many of them already use AI? This is how we know whether we're on the pathway to realizing that projected value of how much AI could contribute to Africa's GDP by 2030.
Wow. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Abiodun. It's been great speaking to you. But that's all we have time for today. Maybe we'll do it again, find time to meet again in the near future. Thank you so much. And to our audience, thank you for tuning into Futureview on AI and Data podcast. If today's dive into AI and emerging technology spark any thoughts, please share with us. We are always eager to hear from you how these ideas land into boardrooms, meetings, even classroom or living rooms. It helps us to do more. Your questions and stories powers this show. So please send us anything you may have. And until next time, my name is Obi again. Stay curious, stay collaborative. As our doctor have said, collaboration is very important, and then tracking of what we are doing. And let's keep building Africa's tech future, one idea at a time. Thank you so much, and see you next time.